fiction has done more harm than good. I call the House to order and welcome the Prime Minister to the floor to open the case for the government.
Both visible and audible. My speech starts in 3, 2, 1. We think that life has ups and downs, and an overly positive attitude does not capture the nuances of the world. Firstly, on happy endings, 3 things to say here. We think that this could either be like being optimistic about the future, but also being optimistic about the view of relationships. Lastly, the idea that good side prevails. On children's fiction and like how this creates a value system. I think that the 5 things to say here. Firstly, children are naive, that they take everything they see as a truth. Secondly, this creates the like children expectation about the world. Thirdly, this creates a perception because like it's a trend, meaning that it's such a dominant narrative. Fourthly, this is deeply embedded in your personal belief because like childhood beliefs go long. But lastly, we think that if opposition have any chance of like having an impact, they cannot contest this. With that said, though, 2 pieces of clarification. Firstly, like we're not saying that every single thing should be a bad ending. We think that they can either be like neutral or that like they're diverse. But second, we don't need to provide a counterfactual that we can like oppose like multiple things simultaneously. Firstly, with that said, though, like why this creates overly positive like a value about life. What does this look like? This looks like the idea that happily ever after, the protagonist always winning, the conflict being resolved. The problem, this means that you don't expect a life as you expect a life as a thing that is completely rosy with no obstacles. The context here is that in actual life we have faced hardships. There are ups and downs, and meaning that when you're actually like in the future faced with an obstacle, you fall down easily. You're not able to overcome hardships. For example, when you become like puberty, things are changing. When you get rejected from your crush, we think that children will not be able to recover from this. We think that this also like creates wrong preparation for their future, because being overly optimistic means that you're unable to like prepare for the worst case scenario. We also think that this means that you will feel something is terribly wrong about you specifically when something goes wrong, because your expectation of the world is that everybody else is like happy, that this is like life is something good, but for some reason you keep failing. What is the weighing here? We think that even if like children are temporarily able to like feel dopamine from like these stories, we think that this is at weird side is more important because we're able to actually have in the life conceptions in the long term. But second, we think that it's actively immoral to have a false conception of the world simply because of short-term benefits. Second, on the optimistic view of like romantic relationship, this looks like the idea that love always succeeds, that the idea that this is something that's permanent, that's something that's happily ever after, that you will find your soulmate. It's also the idea that like love is something that's good, like that it like transforms individual, it gives identity, it's always happy. Why is this firstly, on the idea that love always succeeds. Why is this incorrect? We think that there are, in the vast majority of instances, it always has ups and downs. That is, there are hardships within a relationship where there are emotional conflict between these two partners. We think that this all can lead to things like breakups or rejections. We think that this narrative is categorically false. Why is this harmful? We think that under this narrative, you're not actually emotionally prepared for the nuances of life. That is when you feel you feel that when like there's something wrong with your relationship, specifically when something goes wrong, and you're also don't have the time or effort to react to this, because you're so you won't prepare for this because you're in the complacency, the fact that you believe that emotions is something that will be permanent, meaning that you don't spend a lot of time trying to maintain it. So secondly, on the idea that love is good, this is incorrect, because there are a lot of abusive relationships that takes away your agency, things that are emotionally abusive, that uses emotional connection to control you, or financially abusive relationship where husbands control their lives. We think that these often result in things like verbal abuse, things like after alcoholism where your partner beats you. We think that that is incredibly harmful. We think that when we think that the mechanism here, so we were able to break out of the idea that relationships are always positive. We were able to in the absence of this narrative, we were able to recognize that relationships can be toxic as well, and we give vulnerable individual an opportunity to move on, have greater courage. Lastly, on the idea that good side always prevail. This looks like the idea that like you assign success and failure to individual character traits such as the lazy. We think that this can like be seen in the ant analogy where like the lazy like a person like doesn't have food in winter. We also like equating morality with success, where like the hardworking, the moral character always succeed. We think that this is incorrect on two levels. Firstly, there are structural inequality, meaning that even if you're like immoral, even if you're like you have good character traits, you're still gonna be like not lesser off. But second, we think that we live in a world of corruption and greed, where like rich imperialists and like these strong actors dominate the world. This narrative is incredibly harmful because this creates a black and white, incredibly simplistic view of life. Meaning that if you lose in a competition or you're poor, you feel that you're either immoral or lazy. But secondly, you also internalize other people as feeling like being inferior to you because they're not succeeding. Meaning you're able to justify minority and underprivileged groups as bad. And this becomes the mental conceptual like premise for things like right-wing populism we're very proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the Prime Minister for a very fine speech. I now welcome to the floor the Leader of the Opposition to open the case for the opposition. Hear her.
Am I both visible and audible? Okay. As I stated before, pronunciation, I'll take opioids verbally on. I'm checking the chat. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we think that the main problem with Side Op is that first, they really never define how children evolve in the sense of fiction, and second, why children take this into their heart. We think that at the end of the day, if we can prove a happy ending is not a factor that both sides have, but rather a factor that happy endings can like more of a benefit children's mindset. And second of all, why children's expectation around the world is still within happy endings. We think that our side successfully takes the bait. But before I move on, let's do some like quick clarifications. First of all, we think that at the end of the day, like happy endings isn't a world, or happy ending is rarely a movie that makes like, for example, if Pixar makes a movie around like a person, we get a person, that person, like let's call him X might really never, there's a very rare chance that Pixar will make the movie that X rarely benefits from it and rarely goes on to a world with no hardships at all. Rather, we think that X is probably going to deserve some kind of hardships and still going to roll down. And they also talked about how even through this, those children are going to be downside because those people those people always succeed. First of all, we think at the end of the day, at least our side gives hope. We think that's the most important crucial crux in our side. We think the problem with Side Op the first, because they never really define how children in the sense of fiction, like evolve in the sense of fiction, we think as children grow up, they're exposed to more things. For example, if I'm a baby, I'm not really exposed to things. I just have to eat and sleep, right? When you grow up to like 13, you're more expected to do grades and like do more like things at the end of the day, right? We think it's more over beneficial for a healthy children mindset. But also, we think that their side really never developed about how their side never really talked about or preempted about how children can learn these things in other ways. Why is this so? Because in a moment, we think that when children are naive, and even if you take the case that children are naive, we think that they really never prove why is this so. But even if this is so, this is contradictory in the sense that if you have a bad ending, you're gonna think that, oh, because I have a bad ending, we think because I have a bad ending and that character in the movie has a bad ending, I'm gonna think that every competition I go to and every competition that the character fails, I'm gonna fail in that as well. Then there was no clarification around that. But at least, that's the worst case. Let's talk about our worst case. And even if their side said it's true and those people will really downplay, we think that our side gives a motivation for them to at least do that thing. We think that rather, if it's like not going to competition because you know you're gonna fail is like worse than you go into competition and fail even though you know that you're gonna fail. We think that's better because not only in terms of experience, not only in terms of happiness, we think this can also lead in things like growing up about your failures. But before I move on, let's take that POI.
You say that you attack our efficacy, but we already gave you 5 mechanisms why efficacy exists. But also like your argument on hope and pessimism is contingent on this.
First of all, we think that you like basically talk about like 5 things, a lot of things like children naive, children expectation on the world, dominant areas, etc. This contingent is basically based on that those happy endings isn't gonna face any kind of hardship, and this happy end is gonna impact the child in the sense that it impacts them very well. I already talked about in my previous rebuttals about how at the end of the day children are exposed to other things such as movies having so many hardships, books that can have like worse endings, or in the Saturday school they can just watch like news with their parents, or the parents like discuss that, oh, you shouldn't do this. But I also talk about how children get involved in the sense that they accept more over things that's beneficial to them. Why is this so? Because if I'm a baby, if I'm like a 5-year-old, all I have to do is go to kindergarten and sleep and eat. If I'm 13, I'm expected to get good grades and like exercise or something like that, right? Because it's so when children especially grow, also their knowledge around the world grows. They never really characterize or impact on that. My first argument is how it's healthy for children mindset. No, thank you. As a child, experiencing bad endings will bring like very severe things. When a child is supposed to inevitably learn the dark side of the world at a young age, development mindsets are equally important, right? If one child does not have a positively established view on society, then they'll be dark. It also leads to real life benefits. Why is this so? Because they can learn how even though there are hardships, you can still overcome this. We think this is a major contingent on our side because of the fact that at least our side gives hope. There's a difference between going in a tournament, not going in a tournament because you know we're gonna fail, but going to the tournament having low expectation. We think our side at least better on that point. Also, we think that fairy tales of fiction does not have a happy ending, moreover, like has likely to have hardship as well. We think if happy doesn't necessarily mean a good thing for the protagonist. Moreover, likely means that someone or some other kind of character gets a moral story or a moral benefits. We can see the examples such as the famous Disney movie Cruella, right? Movie is still evolving in the sense of modern society, so they can't really say that this is going to lead to stereotypes or like stereotypes around the world because happy ending society they're still evolving. For example, even though like in the past happy ending story were basically all white people, we think that in the society right now can be developed such as Encanto or Coco, just like a little preemption. But yeah, at the end of the day, our side brings you three things. First of all, our side brings you around the world like they really never proved about why children are naive and why children around the world will be like taken to the heart, but also thought children are not even the sense, not even the sense that they already have other expectations in the world, that other expectations grow within them. We think that because it's so, we think that our side is proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Hello, for a very fine speech. I now welcome to the floor the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for that.
I like verbal. I prefer verbal POS. So my time will start in 3, 2, 1. Before I start my speech, I would like to make 3 justifications. 1, ups and downs exist in both sides, right? The difference happens on how these characters in children movies react to these, right? We believe that the argument on their side about how there are ups and downs on there aren't ups and downs on their side, it does not stand, right? And secondly, we believe that children are naive, right? These are 4 or 5-year-old children who watch these Disney movies, and we believe that because they aren't sophisticatedly educated, we believe that they lack skepticism, right? So we believe that we believe that they will take in whatever they see, especially in these movies where they contain these heroes and children's heroes and these like superheroes. We believe that they're obviously going to take that into their lives, right? They're going to take into they're going to take that movie into their reality, right? And thirdly, our side is not going to describe every single characters of all the movies failing in every single situation, right? This is not the case. What we're saying is that these children's movies have overly been positive. Therefore, all these movies end in a happy ending at the end of the day, right? Even if there are multiple series, right? We believe that therefore, what we're saying is that there should be some movies where they contain happy endings and bad endings, right? To compare how children should act, because they're going to take this movie into their reality, how to act in such cases so that they can at the end of the day succeed in life, right? That is what we're looking for, right? We're not taking this to the extreme and making every single character fail, right? Therefore, with that said, let's move on to the rebuttal. So firstly, they talked about how attacking efficiency, right? However, we already gave five mechanisms. Our prime minister already gave 5 mechanisms of this, and we believe the opposition's hope is contingent on efficiency too as well, right? And secondly, they talked about we will still face hardships and fictions, right, as well, right? However, we believe that what we're saying is that they overcome them in the end, right? However, our side is saying that there should be cases where these characters do not overcome these hardships at the end of the day, right? Because we believe that this is exclusive mitigated, right? Because we believe that this attacks the opposition as well. Because if we face obstacles and mitigate hope and cause, and we believe that this will cause pessimism, right? And still, because bad, and we believe that this is still bad because some individual always end up bad, right? Because especially minorities, in instances where you get rejected by girl, right? Where this love can never be succeeded, right? There are some cases where these children cannot take in if they only watch these happy ending movies, right? And lastly, we believe that the idea that still at the end of the day I can succeed can never succeed in the reality, right? Because all these hardships in the process of overcoming hardships require effort and individual effort, right? And thirdly, we believe that they are also talked about giving hope about life. However, we believe that these bad endings cause pessimism. They talked about how these bad endings cause pessimism. However, we believe that this does not require CF better because we believe there are more harm than good. And secondly, we believe that we can oppose these both, right, at the same time, right? And we believe that it is very unclear why this bad went better, right? And now and lastly, about happy ending for minorities, right? We believe that we believe that this strawmans our argument, right? Because idea that good always prevail, and then if you don't prevail, you're bad. That's not the norm that we want to emphasize our these children, right? And moving on, and we believe that there was no response to romantic relationships and whatnot, right? And now with that said, let's move on to the rebuttals, right? To the extensions, right? So our final extension is about how children are going to act in their life based on the happy endings, right? Based on what they watch, right? Because we believe that they're not going to put in any effort to recover these hardships, right? When faced with obstacles, norm that the protagonist always has happy ending. These children I am the protagonist of my life, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to have happy ending. Even if right now I'm hard, even if right now I have this obstacle right in front of me, at the end of the day, someday I'm going to achieve this happy ending. I'm going to succeed at the end of the day, right? So I'm not urgent in solving this problem, right? I don't have to speed through like solving this problem right now, right? So that is what the problem with this, right? We believe that why is this harmful? Because life is all about enjoying happiness and overcoming slumps, right? If you can't overcome these obstacles, we believe that they can never achieve happiness, and this is not what we want, right? Because life is full of ups and downs, and we believe that this is what we truly want to teach these 4 or 5-year-old children, right? We believe that what's the impact of this, right? We believe that these children are going to feel very depressed from a very young age, and we believe that this can like make them feel like I'm the failure of life, right? And lack of motivation, and therefore I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the DPM for a very fine speech. I now welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to the floor to continue the case for the opposition.
Okay.
Just before we move to the next speaker, can I please quickly go to washroom? I'm so sorry. Yep, I'm back. So sorry for the inconvenience caused.
Cool. Without further ado, then I welcome the DLO to the floor to continue the case for the opposition.
Okay, so am I visible and audible? Okay, then I'd like to start
Yes.
on my 5-minute timer. In 3, 2,
One. The very idea of happy ending as appropriate literally fair for children is an illusion from practically every possible angle, right? Most fairy tales are like full of darkness and violence, and as often like do not like end happily, right? The good end happily, the bad unhappily, right? That's what fiction means. If the bad end happily after destroying good characters, kids have an ideology that being bad is better than being good. If children live to see the good having victory over the bad, the children would have an idea that these bad people should not win, then winning would not have the overall positive impact on society. On this note, 3 problems on this debate. 1, that children being exposed to the dark sides of society is not good. 2, bad endings are bringing constant trauma and negative feelings. 3, their side does not establish the positive elements that happy endings establish and the overall positive elements that our side establishes to this debate, right? So proud to oppose. Teaching kids about story development, conflict resolution, development of characters, heroes and villains, and simply broaden their imagination is actually beneficial to children at the end of the day, right? Furthermore, it can help them differentiate fiction and non-fiction stories, right? Over the years, when all of debaters and adjudicators were very, very little children, they probably have watched fairy tales, right? Now, as a child's perspective, do you want to see princess dying from the pirate, or would you like to see that princess bravely demolish the pirate? Of course, the second option. We believe that from the get-go this way, we focus on children learning about positive and happy endings at young ages and slowly but inevitably being exposed to the dark sides of the world. Everyone in here experienced that process. The world is not perfect. Not right now. The entire opening Ghost case circles around the premise of children not being emotionally prepared. Well, they didn't really watch any Disney shows at all to not know this, right? Isn't happy endings will teach children how that protagonist successfully overcame the hardship? Their side's world is a fairy tale with the protagonist not overcoming the hardships. No process, no positive message for children. Judge, a story has ups and downs in and of itself. It has rising action, climax falling action, resolution. In that story, there are many scenes where the good guys almost lose, and kids learn that in a situation both sides can win, but by being a good character, you have chances of winning. Their side comes up and says that kids like take that into their lives. Well, when they say this, they lost the debate. Why? Because they take everything to the real life situation. They need happy endings. We think that the motive of companies including happy endings is to relieve the children from a journey of stress that they went through in that story, right? But before I move on, I would like to take that POI.
Guys win, reinforce our mechanism for harming minority scapegoating, as well as internalization of the idea that you're immoral.
What do you mean you're immoral, right? We already established the idea of a viewpoint in the get-go of this debate that when a positive character wins, it's actually beneficial for all stakeholders in this debate, right? The vulnerable stakeholders, even minorities in the debate, right? When they actually come up and say this, it's actually our side is going to give motivation and hope, right? It's actually factually true that we're going to give the motivation and hope to the rest of the people, right? When PM came up and said that bad endings prepare children for hardships in the future, and DPM comes up and says that's not true, it's clear contradiction, right? First of all, they never really prove how if children are naive, they take that into content to the rest of their lives as they grow up, right? At the end of the day, children taking into content doesn't really grow up with them, right? As concedingly true, their side's only strong point says that dark endings just help kids prepare themselves, and that dark endings are just beneficial because, not right now, because that the dark endings are actually beneficial for children because they actually can, experience the dark sides of the society. I can actually tell you that LO and DLO proves that the entire opening opposition case kind of washes this out. But the kids slowly being exposed is already a preparing factor to adulthood hardships, as you already said, like depressing movies, right? So they don't really prove how the motives and grow with the children, right? So our side achieves hope, and their side never explains how they overcome obstacles with how their side actually explains how their policy actually supports these stakeholders, right? And he already explained how they overcome obstacles with depressing movies as well. That if they can say that, then we can say that as well. Also, on that point, we also tell you that like our side has benefits, like looking at the happy endings at the end of the day. Even after having those conflicts, we actually have a resolution at the end of the day, right? That resolution as a happy ending helps children achieve hope and motivation, right? Let's look at our case and explain why we see first rankings then. In our role, we have a clear advantage in impressions and lesson for children. We describe from the get-go of the beginning of my speech and the benefits of children shows that in stories is the reason why it introduces children to positive and negative aspects of life. We see that in stories like Rapunzel, a multitude of Disney shows, for example. We see the stories having many conflicts in the movie or the story itself. Now then, we don't get why the concept of learning about both good and bad isn't exclusive to our side, neither do we get wider side characteristics and world as a side that teaches children to be centered in one reality basis. Our side in Reality Judge is basically how children learn about all sorts of both positive and negative elements, and how Captain Hook at one point almost beats the good guys, but also at the end, good guys pushing their way through and finally getting to the resolution, the happy ending. Our side is much better because we receive this a short-term effect that happy movies bring, because as you grow up, you're most likely to do that as well, right? Because we're a positive side, explain that we've received all of those positive benefits to stakeholders. So proud to be on opening opposition. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Speakers are reminded that after 5 minutes and 15 seconds, I'm no longer writing, so you can keep talking if you like, but I shall be getting increasingly sad and upset. Without further ado, then, I welcome a member of government to the floor to extend the case of the government. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Great. Judges ready, opponents ready, and timer ready. Timer will begin in 3, 2, and 1. Judge, the opening side fails to give mechanism on why the good ending or the bad ending works or will work. Judge, this debate is not about the ending of happy or bad, but the process of finding happiness and dealing with this failure. What does the side of opposition try and tell you in today's debate? They tell you that now with actually success stories, they're going to be able to overcome any hardship they can find because these characters, their favorite characters, succeeded through this way. No, Judge, that we tell you that the end result doesn't matter, right? The actual process and how you get that end result matters. Let's tell you why that failed, right? There is no one real answer in life. Any life, in order to get success, you need to have mechanisms of your own style and your own personal way to adapt to those situations. It's about finding your own answer, not finding and following what the story does. Judge, this is also under the premise of failure leads to success, right? You need to be knowledgeable about the different types of failures that you get in order to build upon your own mechanism of success. Judge, you can't pursue a success with an exaggerated one way of success without knowing failure. Judge, in the side of opposition, when they are told that there's one real answer into trying to find success, these children believe that, right? And the opening side team does all the mechanisms. White children are now suddenly going to now follow their footsteps. Judge, their footsteps are exaggerated, their footsteps are unrealistic, and their footsteps are illusions. And their footsteps are just one way to possibly solve that solution, Judge, which is not actually suitable for the majority of the children that actually read this. Judge, therefore, in our counterfactual, what do? We provide them with different types of failures that might possibly happen. They are knowledgeable about, if I do this, this might happen, therefore I will now fail. Judge, these builds up of knowledge makes them prepared and makes them create their own mechanism of success before POI, yes.
Is it better to go in a tournament with the hope that, like, not go in a tournament with the hope that you know that you won't succeed, or go in a tournament with the hope that you know you'll succeed, but like still just go?
Great example, right? Debate tournaments, there is no one right answer to win a debate, right? You have to mechanize your own way of doing that. And Judge, hope is not actually the whole case, right? Judge, there's going to be failures and there's going to be successes, right? We're trying to talk about if it actually did more harm. Judge, now people are now going to follow that one real answer that they think it is. Judge, they're never going to be succeeded. And now at the end result, because they never succeeded, they're going to be not happy, Judge. Now, let's move on to our team's extension about the fabrication of real facts in fiction. What does the industry of this whole situation look like? Opening opposition second speaker does all the mechanism for you when they explain that children wants to see their main characters have a full happy life. Does the industry knows this, and making happy endings are what they are so good at, even at the cost of telling false stories?
Sir.
What is a good example of this? No, thank you. Let's look at Pocahontas, the Pocahontas movie from Disney. Disney wanted a happy ending and fabricated historical facts in order to brainwash children. Pocahontas was raped and kidnapped by colonists, and Pocahontas was underage when John Smith was an adult. In the movie, however, it seems that she's having the most beautiful time of her life. In the story, global problems such as sexual assault, human trafficking, illegal underage relationships, mass murder, and genocides are now undermined, Judge. What is the impact that this has on children? Judge, we tell you that children are now brainwashed to the false ideas of historical facts, and this follows them through adulthood. No, thank you. Judge, still now, we have to note that even adults do not know the true story of Pocahontas. And Judge, it's because of how strong these childhood fictional stories have on these people. What is our counterfactual in our side? We tell you the truth at an appropriate age level, no time. It wouldn't be a gruesome horror story because it's for children. The truth actually lets younger children be knowledgeable about historical facts and how harmful it is to the status quo. We get them exposed to these problems so that they will be better equipped to prepare themselves for it, Judge. In the side of opposition, they fabricate facts and try to brainwash children in order to make them have fun watching those stories, Judge. We tell you that those facts are false. We want to expose them to the truth of today's status quo. Therefore, we are so proud to stand as closing government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Member of Government, for an excellent speech. I now welcome the Member of Opposition to the floor to extend the case for the opposition.
Okay, am I audible? Okay, then I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so Mr. Speaker and Mr. Madam Speaker, we think that first of all, the whole case is just basically on the fact that like we think the whole government side is just basically keep on saying that the children should know this brutal like fact and that and whatnot. First of all, we think that is like completely wrong, right? We think those kind of harsh truths as like opening government stated, it can actually be like learned later on. But like moving on to like the closing bench, right? The closing opposition talks about how there's falsehood and fabricated facts which are used to make happiness and brainwashing. First of all, this is actually this is a very rare example, right? We think that like they talk about Pocahontas and whatnot, but we think that most fairy tales and most children fiction is actually not made based on like falsehood, right? If you look at the more famous and well-known children tales such as but it's not limited to Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid and whatnot, I think they're actually not they're actually like fiction, not like based on colonization or those kind of things. I mean, not those kind of things are rare, but even if we were to say that children were fed these kind of like false things and were brainwashed, I think that that's not really bad as because we think that there's actually more like good that comes from it, right? Judge, we think that from the get-go of the debate, we think that like we think that this whole government bench kind of interpreted this debate as whether or not should we do happy endings or sad endings. But we think that actually this debate as well, if those happy endings bring more harms or bring more good, right? We think that we can actually take this debate if we can just prove that there's more benefits than harms in having happy endings for children, right? And on their point on like how happiness and how like there's like falsehood and whatnot, we think that when children become older, because this children novel is only exclusive to people who are 13 and under, which defines children, right? So we think that those kind of facts and about like colonization and whatnot, like we can actually be learned later on. We think that what is more important is that they grow up in an environment where they have hope and whatnot, right? So that being said, I'll just move on directly into my extensions, right? Because they will actually rebut many points made by other side of the house, right? So first of all, let's move on to my first extension, right? First of all, let's talk about how like children are like vulnerable, right? Other side of the house like keeps on stating that children should know the harsh reality and whatnot, but we think that the children who are under 13 actually are the most vulnerable stakeholder, and we think that like the things they talk about, the harsh reality and whatnot, is something that they can actually learn later on in their lives. It's not something they have to learn as they're just like 12, 11, or even like 8, right? We think that kind of fact that like no matter how it's something you don't have to learn like yet. So we think that children who are very vulnerable, and if we were to go in your best case, like in your case of like having like children learn all these like children's stories being about like sad things and having sad endings, we think that children will be actually, since they're so vulnerable and so young, we think they might actually just think that the world is sad and bad, and will make them think like really pessimistic, right? So we think that it's actually much better to actually give these kind of happy endings, right? Although we cannot deny some harms happen, we think that the benefits, no thank you, outweigh them much more in this case. We think that if children like if children grew up, since children like really like when they're young watch movies, watch fantasies, like read books a lot, we think that this is like one of the most influential factors of them, right? So we think that if you were to like if the endings of stories were not like even say neutral, like even were anything besides happy endings, we think that this would hugely impact the children's view on the world and like and what they believe and the beliefs that they actually have in the first place, right? We think that in the case, we think that these kind of books are the only type of source that
Fast
children can have
recipe.
to actually no thank you can we think that is like the only way they can actually learn things about the world, because as I said, like when children are young, we think this is one of the only things that they actually like and really like pay attention to. So we think that this is really, really influential. So we think this will be like the only way they can actually learn like positive factors such as let's have hope, never give up, have motivation, etc. Right? We think that if you were children like when they're like especially young, they have like no other way of learning this. So we think that especially when they're children, they should actually have these optimistic values, right? Second, let's talk about like how the benefits. So we think that we can have like much more motivation, and we can also incentivize children to never give up, because with this is some clarification that was needed in the opening debate and closing. We think that all stories, regardless of their ending, all have ups and downs, right? It's like while they also have ups and downs, there are also like there's failures and successes in the story, right? If you can look at like fairy tale examples like Little Mermaid, like some mistakes actions made by Ariel actually led to her dying at the end of one. And we think like we think that there's still failures that happen in the story. It's just that we have a happy ending, which is actually what instills the value that children should never give up and should be very, very like positive. Right. Lastly, let's just talk about the social message. We think that if you have stories where no matter what hardships you face, you are successful, we think that gives the value that social life is gonna. We think that as a result, they can also have more happiness, leading to self-actualization, right? When children are actually able to think that, oh, life is good, and when this value is instilled from young age, we think that this is actually what leads to them being happy and being able to have be self-actualized at the end of the day. So we think that our side is very exclusive, and thus we're proud to oppose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member of Opposition, for a very fine speech. I finally welcome the government whip to the floor to conclude the case for the government. Hear, hear.
All right. Am I audible? All right. Thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think endings are a way of transferring lessons and morals that the children can use, not to deliver temporary happiness. Because happy endings in today's status quo are molded to make children happy. We see lessons are not being taught. For example, Cinderella is married to a prince rather than dumped, because that's what makes children happy. That's what sells more books, and that's what makes parents more happy and buy more books from that product produced here. In the short term, we think that it's absolutely great that a child is delighted that Cinderella is happy, but they don't learn anything in the long term. This story that was meant to teach children about breakups and the harsh reality of love has become nothing more than actually listen to at bedtime. This, instead of becoming a fable, it just becomes a story. Judge, you probably heard a million times today that children are impressionable, and this is because proposition fails to recognize that children are easily convinced, easily swayed by what they read and see. This is because they don't have that much experience. Now, this means that proposition fails to recognize that children are easily impressionable, and they're okay with sending young children down rabbit holes. We're going to extend this further in Team's last argument. But let me just remind you that when children are vulnerable, we think it's better that the unfortunate truth get delivered by books rather than into their face by, for example, their parents or their crush, whatever. We think it's rather to put in books rather than actual face. Now, let's just go into a few extensions, because our team's last argument was about the major fabrication of facts that is happening in these fairy tales and because of happy endings. But they'd like to tell you this by saying that most of the time, these stories don't include historical facts, so therefore our argument is irrelevant. And they give you even if case. They tell you that even if this is true, this is not as bad and more good comes out, and they refuse to elaborate. We think this is mostly flawed because of two major reasons. First of all, the top 3 Disney movies, for example, Hunchback of Notre Dame and this story, Cinderella, whatever, but these include historical facts, and these are adapted from historical facts. These attempt to hide, for example, crimes like slavery, globalization, stuff like that. And these global issues are being hidden from these young children. And let's just assume that somehow they expand upon the rebuttal even more. Let's just expand upon the rebuttal more and assume that these don't include historical facts. Proposition is saying it's okay to hide global problems for these children because it's happier for them until they run into nothing, into a brick wall. And we're going to prove why this brick wall is so dangerous. But let's just rebut their team's last extension, which is about how children will think the world is bad and therefore they're going to be pessimistic, and how this causes more problems down the road. But first of all, let me just point out that this is no different from the opening opposition's first argument, which is about making children depressed. So therefore, their extension is really nothing new. So we can't really credit them. But let's just assume that this argument has never been heard before from the opening opposition, and this is somehow new. Now, children knowing reality from books is better than having to experience it. Realizing that their parents don't always love each other is better coming from a book than reality. Unhappy endings can prepare children. It teaches them lessons. And although they might be depressing in the short term to learn that maybe your parents don't love each other, it prepares them. We want to prepare these children for the brick walls that are supposed to come. Proposition is fine with blinding these children and letting them crash and burn. Now, before that, are there any POIs from the bench?
POI, sir.
Yes, sir.
That's also what OG said. That's a repetition, right? We already explained in our speech that that's not the only way that they can prepare.
And I get your point. And I'm going to elaborate that on our team's last extension. I'm going to answer this specifically, and I'll quote you on that. But let's just go into our team's major clash. Are happy endings usually good? Proposition tells you that happy endings do not teach. Secondly, we tell you that they're very generic and rigid, and they follow a very set structure. And thirdly, happy endings, we told you, are fabrications. But opposition likes to present you 4 major points. They tell you that they're eventually going to grow out of it. That these happy endings, they admit to happy endings being bad, first of all, and they tell you that they'll eventually grow out of it. But the path they grow out of it is very ugly. Children are very impressionable. When they see 3 little pigs, they believe that if they invest enough hard work, anything is possible. They do not see that their society is good, and they believe that if they invest more work and they do not get a result, we believe that these people will be broken. We believe that these impressionable children are going to be ultimately flawed. They also tell you that they motivate the children to keep going, and there's alternatives, quote unquote, to actually do this. But we think fairy tales present a very one-liner stance. They present one path to success. There's nothing else. And although this may seem beneficial in the opposition's bench, as they ask in their PY, this sends a very bad message, because life is about adapting. It's about moving on from these circumstances and not being so despaired. Fairy tales only allow for one way to work. And if that one way doesn't work, it's game over. This is a very bad narrative that they're trying to tell you. And lastly, they tell you that children are very easy to force in lessons, in their exact words, so this is the time to shine. But we think this is very counterproductive to their case, because in the end, good guys usually always win, and in human brains, especially children, we tend to focus on the end. What will they learn? We believe that they learn nothing. This is why CG wins over opposition's entire bench, because opposition is never able to prove what these happy endings will teach, how these happy endings will teach, and how so these are so effective. We think reality has breakups, reality has upsets, and reality has hard works that sometimes don't work out. Opposition is unable to respond to this. And lastly, before I end the speech, why CG wins over OG? We think OG had wonderful arguments. They're unable to prove the further larger benefit. CG is able to tell you about the global issues as long as the personal problems. For all reasons, very happy to.
Thank you very much, GovWhip, for a very fine speech. Finally, to conclude the debate as a whole and the opposition bench, I welcome the OpWhip to the floor. OpWhip.
Yes, I'm getting my time up. Ready. Okay, I'll start. We see that most of our stories in the status quo, especially for children, they have good endings, right? And we see that there's a reason, right? We see that we see that there's a reason for this, right? We see that if there's no happy if there are no happy stories in the first place, there's no reason to portray happy stories, right? If there's no hope in the society today, there's no reason to portray hope, right? What the government side is telling you is that we're living in a dystopian world with no hope, no happiness, right? We're living in the world of the giver, right? We have no feelings, we have no we have nothing, right? We're living in a dark world. We are living in a dark side, right? And we say that this is not true, right? So first of all, let's talk about justification, right? Let's talk about why these happy stories are beneficial in the first place, right? Because happy endings provide hope, instilling the belief that obstacles can become overcome, love can last. We see that writing books, it has very good reasons, right? It has very good messages, right? We see that as I said, there are reasons to it, right? We see that there are happy stories because happy stories do exist in our society, right? No, as our first speaker said, children they are vulnerable and they are weak to new information, but they do know what is good and bad. Especially at the age of 3, they do know what is good and bad, right? Even though they might be vulnerable, they do know what's good and bad, right? And they do recognize that the dark side exists, right? They are part of it. They didn't experience it, but they do know that it exists, right? Rather than experiencing it, right? Because we're living in the same world, they get information from parents and the media. And as our first speaker said, because there are parts they need to know in the future, right? They can learn later, right? Whereas on the opening side, they talk about how it's important to go into the dark side. It's important to go into experience the dark side, right? This is not Star Wars. you're not Anakin Skywalker, right? You're not Darth Vader saying to Luke Skywalker, join the dark side, right? This is about children reading happy stories, right? And as I said, by the age of 3, right, they have clear concepts of goodies and baddies, right? They love the happy endings in picture books, and this taste follows us through our teens and into adulthood, right? And if we do have to learn the harsh realities, we can learn it later on, right? In middle school, in high school, we read Romeo and Juliet, we read stories with harsh realities, we read stories with bad endings, right? But we see that children, the most important stakeholders in the debate and the most vulnerable stakeholder, shouldn't be reading this because they simply do not have the defense to get in these stuff, right? We see that it's harmful for them to receive these information in the first place, right? And we see that and second of all, let's talk about the next most important stakeholder, right? The next most important stakeholders in this debate are the book companies and the book authors, right? We see that they create the books and they need an incentive to write these books in the first place, right? As our first speaker briefly talked about, right? We see that book companies, this is a business, right? This is a part of business, right? If they sell more books to children, they get more money, they get more they get more pay, right? And we see that, for example, let's imagine the pandemic's over and you take a vacation, right? You go somewhere warm with no plans other than to bask in the sun, swim in the ocean, and have lots of drinks garnished with flowers, fruit, and tiny umbrellas, right? When you arrive, the weather is excellent. The first day, it's excellent, right? But on the third day, there's a sharp, strong breeze that makes it impossible to go to swimming, right? On the last day, it rains, forcing you to stay inside all day, right? You'll remember this as a bad vacation, right? And this is proven by neuroscientists and experts, right? And in fact, you will likely remember this experience more negatively than the vacation during which it rained most of the time, right? And this applies to the books too, right? If it has a bad ending, if it has a generally bad story, right? The children, they will, because they take in everything as the opening bench, as all of the other teams agreed on, right? Because they take everything they read, right? Every information they look at, right? Because they do this, right? Because therefore, they are going to take in this information. They're going to remember this book as bad, and therefore, these books are going to be represented as bad, right? Because they're children, and it's not like it's not college students reading it, right? They're not evaluating these books in the first place, right? Children are evaluating, right? Therefore, this is a big harm, right? And last of all, let's talk about the harsh reality and the sadness, right? It's better for children to learn the harsh reality when they're teens or older, and instead of learning them from fairy tales, they can learn themselves, right? And after the optimistic values, hope and motivation from happy endings, those with those thoughts can live a happy life, right? With this optimism and hope, they can run for student council president with hope and give all of their effort, right? And without the happy endings in children fictions, there will be consequential, right? Children may never be try to work hard. They will never be optimistic, right? So therefore, I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the opposition whip for a very fine speech, and thank you to all speakers for what I thought was a fantastic debate. Panelists, if you'd like to go to, I think, judge room 1 will deliberate. Debaters, if you want to add me on Facebook, I'm the exceedingly handsome man in black tie on the group chat. I will very happily give you feedback after